That's you, sitting in a cold, damp warehouse on the outskirts of San Diego. It is exactly 2 in the morning. The silence in this room is so heavy it rings in your ears. Sitting across the metal table is Mateo Vargas. He isn't yelling or making violent threats. Between the two of you rests a single object, his loaded gun. Mateo looks you dead in the eye with his signature, ice-cold stare and delivers the sentence that permanently divides your life into a before and an after. Speaking as calmly as if he were discussing the weather, he tells you that you owe his organization $10 million, and you have exactly 90 days to pay it back. You try to swallow, but your throat is completely dry. How did a normal, tax-paying logistics broker end up in this chair? How did you manage to owe a ruthless cartel a sum of money most people won't see in 10 lifetimes? The countdown has begun. 90 days. 90 days. To understand how that clock started ticking, you have to rewind exactly 3 years. Back then, you were just a regular guy with 4 semi-trucks, a cramped office, and a mortgage you could barely afford. You moved standard freight across the San Diego-Tijuana border. It was completely legitimate work. Then, a mutual contact introduced you to a client who needed bulk transport for what the customs paperwork called industrial cleaning supplies. The route was simple, a loading dock in Tijuana to a secure drop-off in San Diego. The pay was $40,000 per shipment. Your standard rate for that exact route was barely $6,000. You aren't stupid. You knew $40,000 by silence, not logistics, but you didn't ask what was really inside those sealed crates because that kind of money permanently deafens your conscience. The first run went perfectly, then the second. By the 5th month, wealth was just flooding in. You paid off all 4 of your trucks. You bought a bigger house. You bought your wife, Sarah, that luxury SUV she had been admiring for years. You told her business was booming, and she smiled and didn't ask why. You were comfortable. You felt entirely safe. Until comfort simply wasn't enough anymore. 18 months into this comfortable new reality, your ambition finally eclipses your survival instinct. An independent broker out of Chicago approaches you with a massive, off-the-books proposition. He needs a high-value shipment moved fast, completely bypassing the normal supply chains. The profit margin is staggering. $500,000 for a single weekend run. $500,000 is exactly the kind of number that makes a man believe he is smarter than the deadly ecosystem he operates inside. So, you take the deal, but you don't use your own network. You use Mateo's carefully corrupted border guards. You use Mateo's secured transit routes. You essentially use a ruthless cartel's multi-million-dollar infrastructure to run a private side hustle that doesn't pay them a single dime. You are skimming from the mob, though you refuse to call it that because acknowledging the word means acknowledging the target on your back. The Chicago drop goes off without a hitch. $500,000 quietly lands in a newly opened offshore account. For exactly 11 days, you feel like an absolute genius. You think you have beaten the system. And then, on day 12, your phone rings. The voice on the other end isn't angry. Mateo Vargas never gets angry. He simply tells you to meet him at the warehouse at 2 in the morning. And that brings us exactly back to where we started. Sitting across from him, staring at the gun on the metal table, Mateo reaches into his jacket and pulls out a small leather ledger. He opens it, and your stomach completely drops. He knows absolutely everything. He recites the exact volume of the Chicago shipment, the precise route your drivers took, and the exact dollar amount sitting in your offshore account. The border guards you thought you bought, they reported to him within 24 hours. You were never operating independently. You were just a rat running inside a maze he built. He doesn't even care about the $500,000 you made. He cares about the precedent. If you can skim from the cartel, anyone can. And if anyone can, his entire empire loses its authority. He slides a piece of paper across the table. The $10 million isn't a debt for what you stole. It is a carefully calculated penalty. $500,000 for the diverted product, $1.5 million for the unforgivable breach of trust, and $8 million for the catastrophic organizational exposure your freelance operation caused. You desperately want to argue that $8 million in exposure is an imaginary number. But looking at the weapon resting between you, you realize his math is the only math that matters right now. The first 2 weeks are pure denial. You try to convince yourself that $10 million is just an opening position, that Mateo is a businessman and businessmen negotiate. The message comes back in 3 days. The number is final. By week 3, the frantic liquidation begins. You sell the warehouse. You sell 2 of your trucks at an enormous loss. You sell the luxury SUV you just bought your wife. Telling her you're simply restructuring the business, she looks at you the way a woman looks at a man who has been lying and just started doing it badly. The breaking point comes when she finds the bank statement showing the retirement account is completely empty. The conversation that follows is the worst 40 minutes of your entire existence. You tell her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. You watch the expression on her face transition from confusion to absolute terror, and then to something that looks like grief for a person who is still alive but already gone. She doesn't scream. She just packs up the children and drives to her mother's house in Austin. You are left alone in a house that is about to be foreclosed on. You make the first installment, $1.2 million in cash, packed into duffel bags and dropped at a designated location. Mateo's people count it and confirm receipt. You have 88 days left, and you are $8.8 million short. With no assets left to sell and no one left to borrow from, you are completely out of options. But the clock doesn't care about your empty bank accounts. You still owe $8.8 million. So, you go back to Mateo with the only thing you have left to offer, your labor. You offer to run shipments for free, applying the transit fees directly against your massive debt. Mateo agrees, but the rules of engagement have drastically changed. The sealed crates loaded onto your trucks no longer contain industrial cleaning supplies. They contain the real product, unambiguous, undeniable, federal mandatory minimum product, pure narcotics. Every successful run reduces your balance by exactly $100,000. You are no longer a logistics broker conveniently looking the other way. You are a full-fledged drug runner operating under the constant threat of death. Over the next 3 weeks, you personally drive 6 shipments across the border in the dead of night, and you barely sleep. Every time you see a patrol car, your heart hammers against your ribs. $600,000 credited. $7.4 million remaining. You have just 19 days left, and you are exhausted beyond human limits. But on day 75, someone finally comes to your office, and it isn't Mateo's men. The man who walks into your office is wearing a simple polo shirt and khakis, looking exactly like a suburban neighbor. But what he places on your desk is anything but ordinary. A federal badge from the DEA. Agent Harris sits down and calmly informs you that they have been monitoring your every move for the last 14 months. They have surveillance footage, GPS tracking data from every one of your trucks, recorded phone calls, and every offshore financial record you thought was hidden. He tells you plainly that they have enough to bury you in federal prison for 25 years. Your heart stops, but then he leans in. They don't want you. They want the supply chain, the border contacts, and the entire financial architecture that moves money back to Mateo Vargas. He offers you a lethal bargain. You have 2 paths. You can refuse, in which case the DEA arrests you immediately and Mateo has you killed in prison to close the loop. Or you agree to wear a wire, become a confidential informant, and walk into the lion's den every single day. You sit there staring at the badge, realizing that every option now ends in a cage. The only variable left is who holds the key. You pick up the pen. The moment the ink dries on that federal agreement, your previous identity is permanently erased. The man who owned 4 trucks and lived a normal life ceases to exist. From this second forward, you are simply a tool designated as CI-14. For the next 6 agonizing months, you wake up every single morning and tape a recording device to your chest. You continue to run freight, continue to sit across the table from Mateo Vargas, and continue to smile right at him while systematically feeding the DEA his entire logistical empire. You hand over every transit route, every border contact, and every offshore account number. Every passing second is a terrifying gamble with your own life. One wrong look, one slightly misplaced word, and you would be dead before the agents could even breach the door. But finally, the trap snaps shut. The operation culminates in a massive, coordinated midnight raid. Mateo Vargas and 23 key members of his network are taken into federal custody. It is the largest border trafficking bust in Southern California in a decade. The underground empire is completely dismantled, and somehow you are still breathing. You are placed into the witness protection program. Your name never appears in the press. In court documents, you are simply CI-14. A number replacing a name, replacing a man who used to own 4 trucks and file quarterly taxes. The government relocates you to a cold, gray city in Ohio, a place you have never visited and never thought about. Sarah comes with you. She brings the children, but she does not bring forgiveness. She looks at you across the kitchen table in a rented house filled with furniture that belongs to the federal government. And she says something far more cutting than any threat Mateo Vargas ever made in that warehouse. She says, "I don't know who you are." And she is right. The man who sat across from Mateo is not the man who signed the papers for the DEA. And neither of them is the man sitting in this kitchen, pretending to be someone whose name he learned only 3 weeks ago. You have become a ghost, a non-person living in a city you didn't choose, with a woman who stayed not out of love, but because she knows the only alternative was raising 2 children alone under a name that might get them killed. You are alive. Your family is physically intact. The $10 million debt is completely gone, and Mateo Vargas is locked inside a federal cage. You should feel relieved, but sitting in that unfamiliar kitchen, you only feel completely empty. You finally realize that every single thing you lost, your identity, your home, your marriage, your entire life, was purchased with a single decision you made at 2 a.m. 3 years ago. Back when $40,000 sounded like an easy solution instead of what it actually was, an invoice with interest that compounds in blood, and the final balance, as it turns out, is always more than you can ever afford to pay. At what exact moment did you realize there was absolutely no way out of this trap? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want more intense true crime stories from the dark side of logistics, hit that subscribe button right now. I'll see you in the next one.